Nick, thank you, man. I know you're feeling under the weather, so thank you very much for still joining us today, man.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thanks for having me.
Because we got a lot to talk about, okay? And let's start here with something maybe on a bit more of the human side, where I really enjoyed Tripp's piece where he got to talk to Marcus Davenport. Now it's not like a one-on-one, like, with quotes type of piece, but he obviously got to sit down and have a pretty open conversation with Davenport. And what Davenport talks about is being very honest with himself, right? And that he's kind of struggling confidence-wise, right? And it's all very relatable. It's all very valid. I'm very intrigued to see how he kind of responds to this. Does he seek some sort of kind of mental training in the offseason to try to shift how his kind of brain chemistry is going? The bottom line is that he is someone who seems to be having a crisis of confidence. And do you have an opinion here, Nick? Was Marcus Davenport kind of doomed from game one? Because what I was kind of struck by while reading it was that it seemed like somebody trying to live up to a standard that was set for him by the price that was paid for his services, right? Like, was he kind of doomed to fall short, or at least feel as if he was falling short, given the pressure he felt to justify that original price tag?
I think so much about him makes a lot more sense now. Like when he was coming out of college, the thing scouts kept saying about him, and I don't think they knew how to articulate it or find the words to describe who he is as a person, but it would be things like, well, he's an artist, or he's a guy that likes to read books. And it's kind of like, what does this even mean? Like, what does reading books mean? But I think, just over time being around him, I think I've come to find out about him that he's a little bit more in touch with his human side than a lot of athletes generally are, or at least, as far as what athletes allow you to see. I think in that atmosphere is kind of, very macho, and Davenport's a guy that allows himself to be kind of vulnerable. And this isn't the first time he's talked about having a crisis of confidence. That came up a few years ago, and he said, kind of like being, he didn't use the word, but, the gist of the conversation was basically that sort of like the cyberbullying and people kind of making fun of him online all the time, really kind of affected him. And he had to figure out how to process that and get away from it. And then he came back and had 9 sacks in 11 games. And it seemed like that was kind of behind him. And now this year comes and there's all the expectations. Dennis Allen's calling him arguably the best player on defense. And I know everyone wants to roll their eyes at everything DA says these days, but this offseason coming into the season, that's a legitimate statement. A guy that has 9 sacks in 11 games.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a player that's on pace to get paid $25 million a year if he can do it again. And he couldn't. And the expectation he even had for himself. I wrote a preseason story about him, where he was basically saying he felt better than he ever did. He got his finger cut off, and there was a lot of pain associated with that when he would rush the passer, when he would, hit people with his hand, and that was supposed to make him less tentative doing all that stuff. And he added weight, and, again, people looked at that and said, well, he got fat. Like he thought he got stronger and was going to be more explosive and be able to bully people even more than he had in the past. And it just did not work out. And I think that's going to be the most difficult contract to kind of figure out in the NFL. They did a little thing with it yesterday with his contract. He had a void date on there. They pushed it back to March 14th instead of immediately after the season. So now there's a little bit of window to figure out what you want to do with him. And I think that's important because he's not someone you can set the market on. I think you have to let Davenport kind of go talk to some other people, figure out what he's worth, and then bring that back to you and decide if you want to pay him. And look, if you can keep him on the team for I don't even know the number. It would have to be pretty small, $3 million, $5 million, and you avoid the $7 million of dead money hitting your cap this year. It might be worth it on a 1-year deal just to see if you get the upside. I think he's still a good depth rotational type player, but you can't pay him to be a starter. You can't count on his production. And, that's just kind of where it's at with him. And even if he has a good season next year, a year from now, he might be back to where he was. So it would be very, very hard to marry yourself to this player, any type of investment that you can escape.
Yeah. It's tough, man. And ultimately kind of like you said, is it mental? Is it physical? Only he can kind of parse through that and answer that. And I wonder, who knows, maybe a change of scenery is kind of needed for him. Only time will tell. Hey, Nick, again, you have a great write-up on it on the site, but Could you give our listeners, you don't need to go, I'll let you determine the length, but kind of just like explain the Mike Thomas contract and why it means that he is maybe outside of like a fringe scenario, for all intents and purposes, he's essentially cut.
So, yeah, I mean, the easiest way to understand this is basically like they basically doubled his salary with a drop dead date of March 17th as a roster bonus, and fully guaranteed it. And what this means is he got cut on paper. Like, he essentially got cut on paper. And, the reason for doing that is because he had a $15.5 million base salary. And if you want to cut him after June 2nd, you can split the payments that you have, and there's the dead money and the cap numbers and all that stuff associated with the signing bonus. After June 2nd, you can split that into 2 payments. So when they depart from him, they want to do that after June 2nd. But by doing what they did now, they were able to take the $15.5 million base salary, lower it down to $1.165 million. So you cleared $14 million in cap space. Mike got basically a $1 million signing bonus for doing that. And what that allows you to do is not carry that $14 million on your books. So it lowers his cap number temporarily. They cut him after June 2nd and split the payments on the other money that's left, and you're good to go. So, like, this is the exact same thing Drew Brees did when he retired. Malcolm Jenkins did it when he retired. So Mike got $1 million to clear the books. So unless they're doubling his salary for playing, just a couple games over the last 3 years and fully guaranteeing it, you can kind of bank on him being off the team. Unless, there's always, there is the drop dead date of March 17th, and you could always go back and renegotiate all this and act like it never exists and come to a new agreement. But I would be surprised if that happens. And it looks to me, just seeing the same type of move before, that this is a precursor to his release.
And what an odd way for this to end, Nick. Have you ever seen something like this where you have a guy that wasn't just on like a great pace? I mean, I don't know that I've ever used this sentence before, but I think this does apply to Mike Thomas. He was on a first ballot Hall of Fame pace. Like, if you look at those first 4 years, what he did defied logic. It defied expectation, and it kept getting better and better, ultimately culminating in this incredible record season. And then the fall off over the last 3 years, which is mainly interrelated, but still the fall off has been drastic. And like, I don't know, Nick, when it's all said and done, is Mike Thomas, like, can he regain that Hall of Fame form, or does he just kind of become a footnote in NFL history? Like, one that, he'll have the record season, but will we actually talk about him amongst the greats when this is all said and done?
It's so tough to say. I agree with you too. I think he was one of the best ever that I've ever been around. I mean, he was truly, truly special. Like, he was a guy that I would have put all my stock into at one point. Is the one guy that you pay, you don't worry about it. He's going to be good to go just because of the way he works and his mentality and all that stuff. He didn't, and I still don't believe he is. I don't think he's a person who's driven by money. I think he's driven by wanting to be one of the best ever. And it's just the injuries and all this stuff have happened, and it has to be extremely frustrating for him because, look, I mean, this is someone that I think like gets a huge part of his identity, like from being Mike Thomas, the football player. Like, I think it's just extremely important to him, and that's kind of where his personality starts and everything comes out from that. A lot of other guys are a little bit different, but like, that seems to be the thing central to Mike's being. And going forward, I wouldn't be surprised if he has some good seasons. I mean, I thought he looked really good this summer and was working his way back. And as you saw, like, the rest fall back, like, things were getting better and better for him. And then, the injury came and that was it. But I would be surprised if he has, just these repetitive great seasons back to back to back. And, I could easily be proven wrong on this. Like, I'm not betting against him. It's just hard to bet for him when you kind of see how things have gone. And it seems like he's a little bit snake bitten, and it's hard to wager on him having good health, season after season going forward. It's a crazy fall off though. I mean, like, the only other thing I can kind of like think of is like a prodigious talent, and the circumstances were completely different. But like, I thought like Rick Ankiel, the pitcher for the Cardinals, at one point was like on a path to that, and then like all of a sudden things went like incredibly sideways for him.
Yeah,
and it's just like kind of like you have to like find these like freak occurrences or just guys with real bad injury luck. I mean, they're out there, but Mike was just like at the top of the game, and it just fell to nothing so quick. It's just kind of hard to get your head around it.
I mean, we're watching the highlights from game one this year, man. what a different year. Felt like it was going to be Thomas, Juice, Jameis, and yet you end with Dalton and Shaheed now knows. And well, Shaheed's great. But so earlier in the show, Nick, we were talking like, okay, Dalton and Dennis. It's kind of feeling like next year may be a running back of Dalton and Dennis. I mean, certainly Dennis Allen will be the head coach. I think the bigger question is, will Andy Dalton get replaced? And look, we went through the free agent class. Maybe there's a couple names there. Look, I think the Saints, I don't know if you feel the same way. I think you do. I think you've told us before, but I feel like they have to draft one quarterback at least every year until they find a guy to see if anybody ends up sticking. But what do you think when this is all said and done? Do they just run it back with Dennis and Dalton?
I like the guy. I think he was solid. I think he did a good job. I'll be incredibly disappointed if we're watching Andy Dalton as the starter of this team again next year. And it's just kind of, you just aren't going to win a game because of him. And no one's ever going to say, man, you gave Andy Dalton too much time. And, it's just tough. It's tough to win games like that. I mean, his third down completion percentage in the fourth quarter of games dropped to 41% this year, and it was like 60-some% in the first three quarters. So it's just kind of like in these situations where you needed him, things didn't get done, and at some point you need your quarterback. So if you're going to run it back with like a mediocre, average-type quarterback, again, I think you, in the right circumstances, perfectly surrounded, everything going well, defense is great, ton of weapons. Like, you could probably win like 9 games with Dalton, but it's, if you want to win at least 1 or 2 a year, have your quarterback make a couple plays, and you say, man, like, they won that game because of the quarterback. And I just don't think that's going to happen with him. I would like him to do something else. If you're going to do it with somebody that has more upside at least. Like, maybe there's some light at the end of the tunnel. Chances are, if whoever that player is, they pick up off the scrap heap. If it is someone else, like, we'll convince ourselves that things could go different for him, and then by week 7 we'll be like, oh man, like, this guy isn't good. But like, let me be fooled for a little bit into thinking that like something else could happen. But I think they got to do more. Hopefully they can trade Sean, get a draft pick, and draft somebody, and maybe have some hope there. But if it's Dalton again, I'm just, man, I just want to see something else. I want to see offense look a little bit easier than it has.
Do you think the Cardinals would give up that pick for Sean?
I don't know. I mean, I will say that like early on in the Sean Payton leaving thing, when things started going bad in Arizona, like, people that know him started predicting Arizona as a possible spot. That's a tough pick, though. I mean, what are they, 4th? I mean, 4th is a lot to give up.
Yeah.
Maybe you get Sean and Jeff Ireland and you talk yourself into it and say that's worth the 4th pick in the draft. I mean,
isn't that kind of weird, though? Is having like the right guy not well worth a first-round pick, almost any first-round pick? Like, I guess, I mean, I know it feels different than it did. I mean, it was like when Gruden was being 2 first, but you're talking about Peyton with the guy who could basically have his pick in terms of NFL teams. Like, surely Arizona would feel like that had more value than a single pick that could hit or miss.
I don't disagree with you. It's just hard for me to think that someone's going to do it until they do it in the top 5. Like, it's just, fair. It's hard to say, but yeah, I mean, look, they got a quarterback they invested a ton of money in. They need somebody to kind of be a disciplinarian for him. I think Kyler Murray needs someone like Sean Payton to reach his full potential. That's probably the only type of person he's going to listen to. I mean, he needs someone with a little cachet that can kind of come in and tell him what he's doing wrong, and maybe that fixes him. I do think that, like, the one thing teams don't do enough of, because, like, people in the front office and coaching staffs and all that stuff, like, there is no cap on that. Like, that is the one place that you could just outspend everybody and outsmart everybody. Yeah. And it does make a significant difference. And if you are a team that's kind of been stuck in purgatory for a while, and that's kind of the story of, the Arizona Cardinals since inception, like, maybe this is the guy to lead you out of it. But the number 4 pick in the draft, I mean, until I see someone actually give it up, it would be tough to do. But I mean, if it is a franchise changer, though, potentially, and that might be worth more than one player. And when you do have a quarterback already in place, maybe you talk yourself into it.
What happened to Will Lutz, Nick?
Andrew came back and
do you think? Yeah. Do you think he's sorry? My bad, dude. I screwed that up so badly. Do you think the Saints give Will Lutz time to figure it out?
a good question. I mean, I think that's one of the big ones on the list. Having a guy that's basically near the top of the league is in kicker salary on a team that's like 500. It seems like a tough investment. I think maybe you rework that or something. You get on the kicker carousel. I mean, a guy that's hitting 80%, isn't that bad, all things considered. But the inconsistencies were tough this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if they try to do something different at that spot. I mean, I think they got decisions to make on just all their special teams. Period. I thought Blake Gillikin got a little bit better as the season went along, but it was rough to start too with him. It's kind of the story of the season. I think that there was just like a lot of pressure let out of the building early in the year, and it took a little while to kind of find your way back to where it needed to be. So they're looking at the coordinators and everything. I think everyone, kind of has to be under that spotlight a little bit. I'd be a little surprised if Darren Rizzi gets let go. I mean, he is considered one of the better special teams coaches in the league, but I think, him and Carmichael, I mean, those are conversations they need to have and decide if it is the right path forward and everything. I think it's definitely a little bit more uncertain on Carmichael than anyone else.
I really apologize, Nick, because I just have a million questions to ask you. So real quick, did you hate the uniforms as much as Mario and Danny did?
Yeah, it looked like a high school team that spent all their money on the white kit, and then like they had to pull out the black uniform to put on top of it. But they have like one that's like really fire, and this was the one that they had to wear as like the alternate.
And then, is there any realistic path to Lamar Jackson? This is a fantasy that I've been putting out there online. Is there anything there, or am I just radio shock jock just saying get Lamar Jackson?
That would get rid of it end the Dalton dilemma. So I mean, I'd be all for it. I don't see it happening. I'd be shocked if they let him out of there. Honestly,
yeah,
it seems like things are a little bit weird with that situation. So I mean, you never say never. But I don't know. Like I don't even know why I don't know why he would pick the Saints right now either. I just don't know if it's like the greatest situation.
Fair on all fronts. Nick Underhill, he's the absolute best. Nick_Underhill, New Orleans Football is a site. Trust me, I want to go sign up. So worth it. Nick, thanks so much, man. Feel better, and we'll talk to you later.
Yeah, appreciate it. Take it easy.